The 2022 NBA Finals is going to be a pretty historic product. I can't lie, whoever wins that championship, it's going to be something special. Because as I sit here and I watch the Western Conference Finals, the Warriors being up 2-0, and trust me, I'm not counting Luka out yet, and then you look out east and you see the Celtics battling it out with the pretender Miami Heat. I gotta say, man, it looks like it's going to shape up to be one of the better NBA Finals that we've seen in a very long time. Because whether it's the Celtics, the Heat, the Warriors, or the Mavericks that win the championship, players' legacies, coaches' legacies, team legacies are going to be enhanced to a whole nother level if they win. But before we get into all of that, make sure you drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and press that bell for post notifications. But without further ado, let's get things started with out west, starting with the Dallas Mavericks. Now I know things look pretty bleak in Dallas right now. They just blew a 19-point lead in game 2 against the Warriors, being on the road. But to be honest, I'm not really too worried about them, though I did pick the Warriors to win that series because I've seen Luka come back from deficits before in series. He just did in the last series against the first seeded Phoenix Suns. So if anybody can bounce back, it's Luka, Doncic, and the Dallas Mavericks. But I gotta say, if this team makes the finals and potentially wins it all, it's a huge deal for everyone involved. Before we even get into the obvious boost for Luka Doncic, just look at the Mavericks front office and organization. This is a team that since the late 90s has not had a flock of great superstars on their team. They've only really had 2 superstars since then in Dirk Nowitzki and now Luka Doncic. But yet they've been able to surround both of those guys with solid rosters that they can contend in difficult Western conferences with. And at the trade deadline, they decided to make a big move in the direction of this team. They moved on from Porzingis, trading him to Washington. In exchange, they received Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. In the case of Davis Bertans, he's pretty trash, though he's hit some solid shots for them, especially against the Suns. But as far as Spencer Dinwiddie, he's come up big in these playoffs. I mean, the guy went from being one of the worst players in the league, or at least starting point guards in the league, I should say, in Washington, to potentially being one of the top players on a team that might make the NBA Finals this year. And speaking of changes, that brings us to the head coach, because one of the biggest changes that this team made in the offseason was moving on from Rick Carlisle, a championship winning coach, to get Jason Kidd. And that move was met with a lot of criticism. I remember when Jason Kidd was in Milwaukee and Brooklyn, he was not the best of head coaches. But I have to say, this guy has done an amazing job. The adjustments that he made in back-to-back series, along with the defensive schemes that he threw at Phoenix, was incredible. I mean, the man had Chris Paul looking genuinely confused on how to attack the defense, and Devin Booker was looking like a high-priced Rudy Gay. So as far as the championship for Jason Kidd, it would be a great turnaround for his career, and the Mavericks front office, it would just be another stamp on them being one of the better run franchises in the league. Then you get to what it does for Luka, and I can't lie, that would do wonders for that man's legacy and set him on a path that's crazy. I mean, him just being in the Western Conference Finals is big, but then making the finals is a whole nother level if you can do that by year 4 and then potentially win it. Oh my goodness. I mean, the conversations of him becoming a top 10 player at the end of his career are already going to be started, and then if he keeps that up, then he could potentially put himself in the greatest player of all time discussion if all things pan out. I mean, Luka isn't even 25 years old. He has a couple more years before he even gets to that. So this guy really hasn't even hit his peak or even his real prime. So for him to potentially win a championship before he even gets there, my goodness, that would be insane. It truly would be one of the greatest first 4 years of any NBA career in history, and honestly, I can't think of a better one ever since Magic Johnson's first 4 years in the league, outside of, you know, the segregation era. But speaking of eras, that brings us to their opponents, the Golden State Warriors, because it looks like their era is still going on right now. I gotta say, this team, I've talked about them ad nauseum on this channel, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, it's just that I'm always having to talk about them because they're always so good every time I have to talk about them. But these Warriors, man, I can't lie, when you look at what they're able to do year in and year out, it truly is impressive and a thing of beauty. I've talked about it in a video in the past. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go and check it out. But this team is literally built to contend over the next decade, because when it comes to building a team like that, it truly just comes down to great draft picks, a little bit of luck, and great development, and the Warriors had all 3 in their favor. For starters, let's look at Steve Kerr. So many people have criticized Steve Kerr to the point that I've heard he's not even that good of a coach. Yeah, miss me with that. It's obvious his system has helped Steph Curry even throughout his slumps this season. If he can get his 4th championship as a head coach, I truly believe it would just further cement his legacy in NBA history as one of the 10 to 15 greatest coaches of all time. The man has introduced a style of play to the game of basketball that's changed it forever. It isn't just Steph, Clay, and Draymond that deserve all the credit. Steve Kerr definitely deserves his flowers as well. Then you move on to a guy like Jordan Poole, and I have to say, what a nice way to kick off your career. The man came into the league as one of the worst players in the NBA in his rookie season, improved in his sophomore season, and showed a lot of flashes and potential. And that brings us to where we are right now, with this man averaging 20 points and 5 assists on 66% true shooting throughout the entire playoffs so far. The man's future looks bright, and a championship added onto that resume is the greatest way he can start it off. But the real legacies here, if the Warriors win this championship, it really comes down to 4 other people. As far as Clay and Draymond Green, it affects their legacies pretty equally. The fact that Klay Thompson is able to come back from 2 season-ending injuries in back-to-back years and contribute at this level to a team that might win the championship is a huge deal for Klay Thompson. Props to him. And the fact he didn't make that top 75 list, if they drop that top 100 list in the next 25 years, he's probably going to be on it. And the same thing applies to Draymond. Even though he was doing everything in his damn power to get ejected last night, the guy is still one of the greatest leaders in the league, especially on the defensive side of the ball, being one of the best defenders of all time. And I personally think he should have been on that top 75 list, but hey, in the next 25 years, he's definitely going to be on that top 100, especially if they win the championship this year. But then that brings us to Steph Curry, and you talk about a legacy boost, this would be the perfect legacy boost for Steph Curry, because one of the biggest reasons why I believe that 2016 loss was one of the worst losses of all time for a superstar wasn't just because he played bad or he blew a 3-1 lead, but because of the aftermath. Kevin Durant joined them, and then when he joined, it was kind of hard to gauge who was really the best player. And even though Kevin Durant won the finals MVPs, Steph Curry was increasing his championships, and nobody really cared. Everybody knew LeBron was the best player in the NBA, and there was nothing that either Steph or KD could do about it because they were on this really stacked team. Well, now neither of them are playing together, and Steph Curry can finally cement his legacy with a 4th championship and potentially his first finals MVP. And if that happens, we're potentially talking about a spot in the top 10 players of all time. But I don't want to go too deep into that. Trust me, that's a video you're going to be getting at a later point in time. But let's move on to the Eastern Conference and start off with the Miami Heat. I mean, my goodness, the Miami Heat, y'all know I don't like this team. I believe they are pretenders. I hope they lose tonight, and even if they win, I still don't have faith in them to win this series. But let's say in some nightmare scenario timeline that they do win this series. Let me tell you something right now. Jimmy Butler, in my opinion, is already a Hall of Famer, but if he isn't in your mind, then a championship would easily solidify that spot. I mean, the guy's been off a perk throughout the entire playoffs, even backpacking this team at times throughout injuries and just poor performances from his teammates. Scam Adebayo, I'm talking about you. And then combine that with him already having a finals trip under his belt in 2020, multiple all-star teams, being one of the better two-way players with multiple defensive teams and some all-NBA selections. I truly just don't see how he isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer with a championship and finals MVP added onto that resume. And then as far as the rest of the supporting cast, what's to really talk about? I mean, Bam Adebayo, it would be cool if he won a championship, but I don't think his legacy is going to get any crazy. The guy's been mid offensively for most of the playoffs. Tyler Hero has been up and down, though he does have his benefits. Let's be honest, Tyler Hero just isn't doing it for me. The only guy this ring could really matter for is Jimmy Butler. Eric Spoelstra, big ups to him also, because let's be real, he is one of the greatest coaches of all time. You could argue a top 10 to 15 coach ever, in my opinion. The defensive schemes that this man can throw at a team is truly a coaching masterclass, so props to Spo. A championship would just further cement his legacy as one of the greats at his craft. But enough of those pretenders. Let's be real, they're not winning the championship this year. They're not getting past the Celtics, and they're gonna lose in 5. But speaking of those Celtics, that brings us to the final team of this video and these players, the Boston Celtics. For starters, big ups to this team, because this front office, my goodness, what a roller coaster of a year. You start off the season one of the worst teams in the league. You weren't even a play-in team at a point in time. Then you lose to the Knicks because RJ Barrett banks in a 3 off the backboard at the buzzer, and it seemed to wake these guys up. I mean, I would wake up too if that trash ass nigga hit a game winner on me. My goodness, the Knicks are really gonna make him the franchise player of their team. But back to the subject of convo, the Celtics, my goodness, what a turnaround after that moment. Because with Marcus Smart buying into the coach's philosophy, not just being a shot chucker and a bad decision maker all the time, time. Great play from Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, a duo that many people thought should break up. Even me myself, I was critical of Jason Tatum at a point in time in the season, but those guys bought into Udoka's philosophy of ball movement and unselfishness, and it's really been huge for this team as they're now in their third conference finals over the last 5 seasons. And it ain't just the stars, even the role players and the rest of their starters are buying into this. Grant Williams really looks like the next PJ Tucker. You got Peyton Pritchard, a nice shooter and player off the bench that can be used in a lot of different ways. And let's not forget my boy, the great Al Horford. My goodness, what a rejuvenation this year in the playoffs, especially against the Bucks. My guy was the Giannis stopper, I have to admit. And you talk about a guy that can make the Hall of Fame. If Al Horford gets a championship, maybe he puts himself in that conversation, because it ain't like he rode the bench like David West did for the Golden State Warriors. He's contributed in a major way to stopping arguably the best player in the NBA, or at the very least slowing him down. Then you look at a guy like Marcus Smart, who's already had one of the greatest defensive years of all time, historically speaking, at least for a guard, being one of the few ones to win Defensive Player of the Year, whether you agree with it or not, as his elite defense is now carried over into the postseason. And if they add a championship onto that, it will really be the ribbon on the perfect year for his career. Then you look at a guy like Jaylen Brown, and I truly believe a championship would solidify his star status in the league if it isn't already solidified, because let's be real, the guy wasn't an all-star this year, and granted they did start off slow, but I do believe that Jaylen Brown is one of the more underrated and overlooked stars in the league, just because Jason Tatum is that dude, and trust me, he's him. But Jaylen Brown also deserves his flowers. And while we're on the subject, let's just talk about Tatum for a second, because it looks like he's turning a new leaf and becoming a superstar before our very eyes. I mean, the guy has grown so much this year as a player, especially as a playmaker. His passes and reads in the half court have taken another leap in his game. He sees the floor a lot better, and the tunnel vision he had earlier on in the regular season, it's almost non-existent now, because we knew he was a great scorer, but it was all about getting your teammates involved and making the right decisions as a ball handler and decision maker, whether it's as a scorer attacking the defense or attacking them as a passer and distributor. And then on top of his offensive improvements, you got to look at what he can do on the defensive end, because my goodness, this guy is an elite defensive player and one of the best two-way players that we have in this league. And with Tatum, we're always talking about him being the future of the NBA, and I truly don't believe that anymore. I believe the future, quote unquote, for him is already now, because in the present, he is already doing what he's doing right now. He's already one of the 10 best players in the league and arguably a superstar. And if he wins a championship along with what I assume the finals MVP, those things aren't even arguable anymore. And speaking of what's not arguable, shout out to my guy Ime Udoka, because my goodness, people expected him to fail. First year head coach, Nigerian brother, I gotta give him all the love in the world. He's married to Nia Long too. What kind of other dubs can I give this man? If he wins a championship, that's just the cherry on top of all the dubs he's already receiving in life. So I have to admit, if this Celtics team can win a championship after starting off 18-21 and being hit with a game winner by RJ fucking Barrett, it truly might be one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of sports, in my personal opinion. But hey, that concludes this video, you guys. Let me know what you think about either team winning a championship this year, and what do you think it's going to do for the legacy of the players and the team overall. Make sure you follow me on social media. The links for my Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are in the description box down below. This is your boy Young Mustard signing out. Y'all stay safe and have a blessed day. Peace.